For a man like Victor Calderon, control wasn't just a habit. It was the air he breathed, the foundation of his entire world. And right now Victor was irritated because his control had slipped. He was supposed to be in a closed-door meeting in downtown Chicago, tying up deals that required his full icy attention for at least 2 more days. But things had wrapped up faster than he liked, quicker than they should have. Hey there and welcome back. I'm so happy you're here. Grab that blanket, maybe pour yourself a hot drink and get really comfortable because today we're settling in for a story you won't forget. Before we dive any deeper though, let me know how you're doing. Drop a quick comment and tell me what part of the world you're watching from today. And if you want to stay with us through all the twists and turns ahead, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a moment. Alright, let's get back to it. Victor didn't like quicker than they should have. It meant something was sloppy. He was a commanding presence, even when he was just walking across a freshly manicured lawn. Tall, powerfully built, and dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that hid none of his physical strength, Victor moved with the kind of economy that spoke of constant alertness. His face was ruggedly handsome, his dark eyes sharp and constantly scanning. He carried the weight of his reputation, the whisper of Mafia boss, in every deliberate step he took. He'd taken a private jet straight back to his estate, a beautiful, sprawling home tucked away in the quieter, more reserved hills outside Toronto. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress of solitude and success. Pulling his own car into the 3-car garage, Victor stepped out and the quiet enclosed space immediately absorbed the sound of the door clicking shut. He expected silence. He expected the deep, settled, expensive calm that only a perfectly run empty home can provide. He walked into the main house through the discreet service entrance, expecting everything to be exactly as it was when he left, dormant, waiting for his return. But the moment he stepped from the cool, concrete garage into the warmth of the back hallway, something was instantly wrong. It was the lights. Victor's routine was famously rigid, and his security system was tied into everything. When he was away, certain lights stayed off. The grand chandelier in the foyer, the dim floor lamps in the study. Yet the small antique lamp on the hall table, the one that should only be on in the evening, was shining. Cast an awkward, misplaced pool of light. It was a tiny thing easily missed, but to Victor, it screamed disruption. It was like finding a single broken gear in a multi-million-dollar clock. He stood still, his body instantly going rigid, his eyes narrowing as they swept the silent hallway. The air inside the house felt thick, not just warm but charged. It felt watched. Victor didn't need a loud alarm to tell him things were amiss. He had a lifetime of instinct whispering threats into his ear. He removed his tailored jacket and dropped it silently onto a nearby chair, his hand already moving toward the small, heavy object hidden beneath his shirt. He was moving not out of panic but out of professional readiness. He was preparing to make his way to his office, moving like a shadow through his own perfectly furnished home when he saw her. Elena Moretti was the housekeeper, a woman who had been with the family for years, long before Victor took over the estate and the business that came with it. She was in her late 40s, always impeccably neat, her silver-streaked hair pulled back tightly, her face usually set in an expression of quiet, focused work. She was reliable, discreet, and usually invisible. Today she wasn't invisible. She was standing frozen in the archway leading into the kitchen, a silver tray of half-eaten pastries clutched so tightly in her hands that her knuckles were white. Her eyes, wide and dark, weren't focused on the tray or the kitchen floor. They were locked on Victor. The sight of her wasn't what stopped him. It was the look on her face. It was pure, unadulterated, cold fear. Victor had seen that look 1,000 times, but it was always directed at him or because of him. It was a reaction he controlled, a necessary tool of his trade. He never expected to see it radiating from someone inside his safe, controlled environment, and certainly not directed at himself. "Elena," Victor said, his voice a low, hard rumble that demanded immediate attention. "What is it?" Elena didn't move. She didn't drop the tray, didn't flinch. She just stared at him, her lips trembling slightly. Then slowly, painfully, she mouthed 2 words, barely a breath, definitely not a sound. "Stay quiet." The power dynamic fractured instantly. This wasn't the housekeeper deferring to the master. This was a warning from one person in danger to another. For the first time in perhaps a decade, Victor felt a profound, chilling twist in his gut. "Speak," he commanded, his voice barely audible, the deep, rumbling edge still present. He took a single slow step toward her. Elena, a woman who had spent years observing the silent violence that surrounded Victor, understood the gravity of his words. She nodded, a single sharp jerk of her head, and turned back toward the counter, grabbing a damp cloth, forcing her hands into a rhythmic cleaning motion that was clearly agonizing. Victor watched her for a moment, making sure she was grounded. He knew the risk he was asking her to take. But he also knew Elena's strength. He turned toward the front of the house. The hallway was long, lined with family portraits that now felt like mocking spectators. Victor walked toward the living room, his steps silent on the thick Persian rug. Every fiber of his being was screaming caution, but he couldn't simply run or wait. This was his house. This was his territory. He reached the edge of the large, formal living room which opened into the dining room. He paused, leaning against the thick, cool wall, listening. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace. It means the predator is holding its breath. Victor slowly moved his head around the corner. The dining room table, a vast dark expanse of polished mahogany, was empty. But a man was sitting not at the table but angled away from it, near the fireplace. His back was to Victor. He was a mirror image of Victor in his build, but older, with a slightly more weathered look. He was running a thick gold ring over the edge of a crystal water glass, the faint tink-tink-tink sound the only movement in the room. It was Alessandro, the prodigal, dangerous brother. The man who shouldn't be here. The man who everyone believed was gone for good. Victor felt the cold fear Elena had shown, but channeled it, twisting it into a burning, focused rage. He knew right then that no matter what happened next, this day would end in change. He took another deep breath, forced a look of weary annoyance onto his face, and walked deliberately into the dining room. "Well, well," Victor said, his voice loud enough to carry but casual enough to sound almost bored. "Look what the wind dragged in. I thought I left you to rot somewhere sunnier than this, Alessandro." Alessandro's head snapped up. He smiled, a wide, empty, chilling smile. "Little brother," he drawled, his voice deep and smooth like old velvet. "Always the formal welcome. I was just catching up on things. Getting comfortable." He gestured around the room. "And I see you've finally figured out how to use the expensive light settings. Progress." Victor walked closer, stopping 10 feet away. He didn't look at Alessandro's eyes. He looked at his hands, watching for any sudden movement. "I wasn't expecting you, which is usually a sign I should expect trouble," Victor countered, his face a mask of weary professionalism. "Did someone send you a message? Because if you're here about the port deal, you know that was settled years ago. You don't have a piece." Alessandro chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He slowly pushed himself out of the chair, standing to his full, imposing height. "Always business, Victor. Always the little man worried about the spreadsheets," Alessandro said, taking a slow step forward. No one sent me a message. I came back for a reason much closer to the heart, brother." Alessandro paused, his dark eyes finally locking with Victor's. The grin on his face faded, replaced by something dark and intense. "I came back for what you took from me. All of it." The tension in the room coiled, tight and lethal. The stage was set. Victor, the man who craved control, was staring at the one person who could tear his world apart, right there in his own dining room. But even as the menace radiated off his brother, Victor's mind was already racing, formulating plans. He had come home early, he had been thrown into danger, but he was Victor Calderone. He was a survivor. He would not be broken here. He let a slow, determined smile curve his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes but showed iron will. "You always were ambitious, Alessandro," Victor said, his voice quiet, filled with a dangerous promise. "But ambition is only useful if you're alive to enjoy it." The battle for the house, for the business, and for everything Victor held was about to begin. The silence was broken, but the true fight had just started. Despite the immediate threat, Victor felt a strange surge of energy. This wasn't the end. This was a ferocious, terrible, and ultimately exciting challenge. He would prevail. He had to. He wasn't built for defeat. He stood his ground, a picture of strength and determination. For now he was safe, he was home, and he was ready. Hope, justice, and the love for his own survival were the only things that mattered in that moment. The moment Victor Calderone stepped back from the dining room archway, the dangerous calm he had presented to his brother, Alessandro, vanished. The icy professional mask dropped and he was back to the core feeling of primal threat. But unlike a typical boss who would storm his own house, Victor was now following a maid's instructions. Elena Moretti was still in the kitchen, wiping the same stainless steel counter with a methodical, almost desperate rhythm. She hadn't looked at him, but she knew he was there. Victor watched her for a moment, noticing the slight tremor in her hands. This woman, who handled priceless china and delicate silks every day, was terrified, yet she was holding her position. Victor spoke quietly, keeping his voice beneath the hum of the powerful refrigerator. "I need to get to the server room. The one behind the library." Elena didn't stop wiping. Her eyes were fixed on the counter, but she spoke, her voice still a thin, strained whisper, perfectly timed between the swoosh of the damp cloth. "Not through the main hall, Mr. Calderon. The cameras are on a tight loop, but the noise sensors, they're running high today." "He's listening." Victor paused. He had installed those noise sensors specifically to catch intruders. He thought of them as his ears. But Elena knew they were also a trap. "The server room," she continued, her focus absolute. "Take the pantry. Go through the old service pantry, the one that's never used. Push on the fourth shelf near the dried beans. It leads to the servants' stairs." Victor knew the house, of course, but he knew it like a king knows his kingdom. From the front, from the grand sweeping views. Elena knew it like the root system of an ancient tree. The hidden connections, the parts that were dark and dusty, the veins where things moved unseen. He nodded once, accepting her superior knowledge without argument. That was the most unsettling part of all this. The maid, the invisible helper, was now the commander, and he, the powerful mafia boss, was following her orders into the shadows of his own home. He slipped through the kitchen and found the old service pantry, a forgotten narrow space that smelled faintly of dust and spices. It was exactly as Elena had described. The fourth shelf, near a jar of dried kidney beans that must have been a decade old, offered a slight resistance when he pressed it. He pushed harder, and with a soft, grinding sound, a tall, narrow panel swung inward. Victor stepped into the darkness. It was a service stairwell, steep and winding, used years ago by staff but now mainly for storage. It was cramped, dusty, and absolutely silent. He started climbing, his expensive leather shoes kicking up fine powder, ruining his perfectly tailored look. He didn't care. As he moved, he started to connect the dots of what Elena was showing him. The blind spots and anticipation. She had directed him through the one route that was entirely unmonitored. A blind spot he himself had created by decommissioning these stairs for aesthetic reasons during a renovation. But as he climbed, his mind, sharp and tactical, started piecing together the subtle details that suggested something more than just quick thinking on Elena's part. Victor realized with a cold certainty that Elena hadn't been hiding from Alessandro. She had been hiding Victor from Alessandro. And that meant she had anticipated Victor's early return. But how? Victor was the only one who knew his travel was cut short. He hadn't called the house. He hadn't alerted his security detail that he was coming straight home. The first person to see him had been Elena. Unless Victor stopped on the small, dusty landing at the top of the stairs. He remembered the brief, controlled phone call he made to his wife, Eliza, the night before. He remembered telling her he would be tied up for 2 more days, but he might wrap up early and fly back Thursday night. He never said he would call. He never said he would check in. The wife who always tried to walk on eggshells, who hated the life he led. Had she told Elena? Had she asked Elena to be ready? The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't being protected by a loyal servant. He was being protected by a conspiracy of women, his wife and his maid, working together. And they were doing this because they understood the level of danger he was in better than he did. They understood Alessandro. He found the access panel Elena had described. A disguised doorway that blended perfectly with the mahogany paneling near a large, seldom-used bookshelf. He pushed the wood where it met the floor and the section slid open silently. He was now in a narrow hallway that led directly to the office wing. He slipped through and closed the panel. He was safe for now, shielded in his own office wing, heading toward the heart of his control, the server room. When he reached the small, windowless server room, he didn't waste time. He accessed the main terminal, his fingers flying across the keys, inputting the highest security clearance codes. The room's screens flickered to life, showing the live feed from every camera on the estate, inside and out. The first thing he looked for was Alessandro. The camera feed for the dining room was strangely still. A message appeared in the corner of the screen. Feed disabled, manual override. Alessandro wasn't just sitting and waiting. He had neutralized the very surveillance system Victor relied on. But he hadn't done it completely, he'd left the rest of the house feeds active. A deliberate, mocking gesture. Victor scrolled through the remaining feeds looking for anything out of place. The outside gates were locked. No strange vehicles. No sign of a hostile force setting up positions. Alessandro was here alone in the dining room, waiting like a spider in the middle of a web he was actively spinning. Victor sat down, gripping the edge of the desk, forcing himself to breathe deeply. He was trapped in his own house, and the only person who had given him reliable intelligence was the maid. He looked back at the kitchen feed. Elena was still wiping the counter, her posture a little straighter now, the tremor almost gone. She looked up briefly, not at the camera but up, as if sensing his eyes on her. It was a faint, almost invisible gesture, but Victor read it instantly. I did my part. Now you do yours. Victor felt a rush of complicated emotion. Humiliation, yes, because he had been outsmarted by a man he thought he'd defeated, and saved by a woman he considered part of the furniture. But beneath that was a profound, almost comforting sense of connection. These women, his wife and his maid, were fighting for him not out of duty but out of some deep well of care. They weren't fighting for the king. They were fighting for the man they knew beneath the suit, the man who was now in terrible danger. Victor brought up the floor plans of the house on another monitor, overlaying them with the security grid. He started to plot his next move, realizing he couldn't just rely on his usual heavy-handed tactics. He had to be as silent, as unseen, and as intimately knowledgeable as Elena. He realized the true meaning of the past 2 hours. His power, his money, his organization. None of it was useful right now. His only real advantage was the quiet, intimate knowledge of the people who cared about him. The maid knew the house better than the king, and that was the secret weapon Alessandro could never see coming. Victor knew what he had to do next. He couldn't fight Alessandro openly. He needed to find Eliza to confirm her role and to make sure she was safe. He needed to coordinate with the women who held the real keys to the kingdom. He smiled, a genuine, focused smile this time. This was not the battle he wanted, but he was ready to fight it on her terms, in the shadows, using the small, vital details that only love and intimacy could reveal. He was saved by the unexpected, and now he would fight with the unexpected. Hope in this moment didn't come from a loaded gun. It came from the quiet resolve of the woman in the kitchen. Victor Calderone sat alone in the dim server room, surrounded by blinking lights and the constant low hum of machinery. He was the most powerful man in the room, maybe even the most powerful man in the house, but for the first time in a long time he felt completely exposed. He had seen the proof. Alessandro was not just here, he had disabled the surveillance feed in the dining room. A move that was cold, calculated, and deeply informed. He had to get to Eliza. His wife. She was the one link that tied all the loose ends together. The early warning, the maid's strange certainty, the feeling that this whole ambush had been expected. Victor rose quietly and slid the hidden panel open, moving back into the dark service hallway. He needed to get to the upstairs master wing, where Eliza usually retreated when he was away. He climbed the last set of dusty service stairs and emerged into a linen closet near the master bedroom. He slipped out, careful to close the door without a sound. The upstairs hallway was luxurious, lined with expensive, muted artwork and thick carpets that swallowed every sound. It was eerily quiet. Victor moved like a shadow, his mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating the angle of any potential threat. When he reached the master bedroom door, he paused, his hand hovering over the cold brass knob. He could hear nothing. He pressed his ear to the wood, concentrating. Still silence. He pushed the door inward very slowly. The room was vast and plush, filled with expensive furniture and large windows overlooking the manicured grounds. Eliza was there. She wasn't sitting by the window reading or organizing clothes as she often did. She was sitting on the edge of the enormous bed, dressed in a simple dark sweater and jeans. She was holding a small silver picture frame, staring at it intently. She looked up the moment the door began to creak open, and the relief that flooded her face was instantly extinguished by fear. "Victor," she whispered, her voice a sharp exhalation of breath. She didn't move toward him. She just stayed frozen on the bed. Victor walked quickly to her, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of a planted device or a hidden threat. Alessandro is here, he confirmed, his voice low and urgent. He's in the dining room. He disabled the dining room feed. Eliza nodded, her eyes wide and dark. I know. Elena told me he came back yesterday, a day after you left. Just walked in. Like he owned the place. And you didn't call me? Victor asked, his voice firm though not accusatory. Eliza's chin lifted slightly, a stubborn gesture he recognized. What would you have done, Victor? Flown back into a trap? We had to know what he was planning. He told Elena he was waiting for you. Victor pressed. You and Elena? How did you know I was coming back early today? Eliza looked away toward the large walk-in closet. I spoke to your pilot's assistant. I asked him to let me know the minute the return flight was filed. I knew you hate being idle. I told Elena to be ready to warn you. A small, genuine smile touched Victor's lips. His wife, the quiet woman of the house, had just circumvented his entire security protocol using nothing but social maneuvering and clever guessing. She was far stronger than he had ever given her credit for. You're brilliant, Eliza, he said, taking her hand. His touch was firm, conveying a sense of grounded control he didn't quite feel. Now we need to move. He's expecting me to come at him like a bull. We need to go silent. We can't, Eliza said, her voice dropping lower. There's something else. Something worse. Before Victor could ask what, they both heard it. Freep, freep, plunk. It was a sound that shouldn't exist. It was faint, muffled, but absolutely clear. The sound of something moving directly above the ceiling of the master bedroom. Victor's head snapped up. His eyes drilled into the plaster ceiling. He knew the blueprints of this house better than anyone. Above the master bedroom was only the finished, insulated attic space. It was sealed tight, used only for storage, and had no floorboards near this part of the roof. To walk there, someone would have to be crawling over exposed beams. What is that? Eliza whispered, her hand tightening around his. Someone is up there, Victor said, his voice deadly calm. He was no longer dealing with a rogue brother waiting downstairs. He was dealing with a planned, organized intrusion. They're in the attic. He looked at Eliza, his eyes conveying a silent order. Stay quiet. Stay still. The movement continued. A soft dragging sound followed by another muffled clunk. It was slow, deliberate, and moving toward the center of the room. Victor realized the horror of the situation. This was the most secure room in the house. If someone was directly above them, it meant that the infiltration had been deep and potentially lethal. He quickly pulled Eliza toward the massive antique wardrobe built into the wall. Get in, he ordered, pushing the heavy mahogany door open. Stay silent. No matter what you hear, you do not come out. Eliza looked terrified, but she trusted him. She slipped inside the wardrobe, pulling the door shut until only a tiny sliver of light escaped. Victor drew the compact, heavy pistol he carried and moved silently toward the wall near the headboard. The sound above them stopped. The silence returned, now charged with an unbearable tension. He waited, counting the seconds, his grip steady. Then he heard a small, sharp metallic click. It came from directly above the center of the ceiling. Victor knew that sound. It was the sound of a camera housing being manually inserted through a pre-drilled hole. This wasn't Alessandro trying to find him. This was Alessandro's people trying to watch him. They hadn't just turned off a few cameras. They were installing new ones. They had physically drilled into the ceiling of the most private room in the house. This knowledge sparked a chilling secondary realization for Victor. The breach wasn't just physical, it was systemic. He remembered the faint, almost invisible details that had been bugging him for weeks, details he had dismissed as the result of a tired mind. Someone close to Victor, someone with full access and engineering knowledge, had been working slowly, methodically for weeks, preparing for Alessandro's return. They had not compromised the fortress overnight. They had been drilling holes, rerouting wires, and creating backdoors over a sustained period. It meant that his personal security detail, his loyal staff, or maybe even someone he considered a friend, had betrayed him. Victor felt the cold steel of the gun in his hand. He wasn't just fighting his brother. He was fighting a meticulously planned internal coup. He moved quickly, silently to the center of the room, directly under the faint clicking sound. He didn't look up, he didn't need to. He knew exactly where the camera was being placed. He raised his weapon, aimed at the exact spot where the tiny lens would emerge, and fired a single sharp muffled shot into the ceiling. The sound was instantly followed by a metallic thud and a cascade of plaster dust. Then silence. The movement was gone. The threat was neutralized. "It's over," Victor called softly toward the wardrobe. "They're gone." Eliza emerged, her face streaked with dust but her eyes steady. She looked up at the fresh hole in the ceiling, the plaster spilling onto the luxurious rug. "Who was that?" she breathed. "Doesn't matter now," Victor said, holstering his weapon. "What matters is what they were doing. They weren't just looking for me. They were installing an eye in the wall. This house isn't safe, Eliza. Not anymore. It's time to disappear." He looked at his wife, truly seeing her strength and her silent readiness. He saw the loyalty of Elena downstairs. He realized his true power wasn't in the walls of the house, but in the people who had risked everything for him. He took Eliza's hand again. "They prepared for weeks. They thought they had time. But they didn't count on us being ready today." He smiled, a look of grim determination washing over his face. "We are walking out of here, Eliza. And we're going to use all those gaps and blind spots Elena and you kept track of. We will use their own silence against them." As Victor led Eliza toward the Secret Service stairs, he felt a fresh wave of confidence. His fortress had been compromised, but his mind had not. His loyalty was not misplaced, just relocated. He had lost control of his environment, but he had gained a greater kind of control. The support of the people he loved. They were moving from fear into action together. The fight was just beginning, but Victor and Eliza were now finally on the same side, and that felt like the truest victory of all. Victor and Eliza moved quickly and silently through the hidden service corridors, Victor leading the way while Eliza, surprisingly agile, followed close behind. The tension they shared wasn't just fear. It was a tight, focused energy that came from fighting side by side against a shared enemy. Their immediate goal was to meet up with Elena again. She was their only source of reliable, immediate intelligence. They emerged from the service stairs and slipped back into the quiet, dusty service pantry. Victor pushed the shelves closed and then moved into the main kitchen. Elena was still there. She had traded her cleaning cloth for a stack of folded napkins, which she was arranging with meticulous care. She looked up the second they entered, her eyes reflecting the relief of seeing them safe, but also the deep, constant worry of someone living on a knife's edge. "Mr. Calderon. Mrs. Calderon," she said, her voice a low, steady murmur. "You are safe. For now," Victor corrected, his voice as quiet as hers. "They're above the ceiling. They're installing cameras. This house is completely compromised, Elena. We need to leave. No. But first I need to know everything." Victor sat down on a high kitchen stool, leaning forward, his posture demanding honesty. Eliza stood close, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Tell me why you told me to stay quiet, Elena," Victor said, his eyes drilling into hers. "You weren't just hiding from an intruder. You were hiding me from my brother. Why did you risk everything for me?" Elena stopped arranging the napkins. She placed them down and looked Victor straight in the eye. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was mixed now with a deep, resolute sadness. "I risked it because of what I know about Alessandro," she started, her voice dropping to a confidential pitch. "Mr. Calderon, you know I worked here for your father for many years, since before you boys were grown. Alessandro. He was always cruel. Your father tried to control him, but Alessandro only respects power, not loyalty. When he left, everyone was relieved. I always believed if he returned, it would only be to burn everything down." She paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. "When he walked in yesterday, it wasn't a surprise. But the way he walked in, he was smiling. That cold, empty smile. He didn't ask for money or a share. He just sat in the dining room and said, 'I'm waiting for Victor. I'm going to take his life the way he took my old one.'" This was all true. Victor could feel the truth of the narrative resonating with his own memories of his ruthless older brother. But Victor wasn't finished. He knew there was a deeper layer, a more personal motivation driving her. "And what about you, Elena?" Victor pressed gently. He shifted his tone from that of a boss to that of a concerned man. "What does Alessandro have over you? Is there something you haven't told me? Why did you hide my return from him?" Elena's eyes, which had been so steady and direct, flickered. She looked down at the immaculate counter, her fingers nervously smoothing the crisp edges of a napkin. That slight, involuntary movement told Victor everything. She was about to tell a story and part of it would be a lie. "Mr. Calderon, I have a family," she said, her voice suddenly tight with emotion. "I have a grandson, Marco. He is 10 years old and he lives with my daughter in a small apartment in Ottawa. I came to this country years ago to give them a better life. This job, it pays for Marco's private schooling, his therapies, everything." She looked up and this time her eyes were shining with unshed tears. This emotion, the deep protective love for a grandchild, felt absolutely real. "Yesterday when Alessandro came in, he didn't just sit and wait," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "He had someone call me. A strange man. The man told me he was watching Marco on his way home from school. He said if I breathed one word of Alessandro's return to anyone, especially you, that Marco would disappear." Eliza gasped softly, her hand moving from Victor's shoulder to her own mouth. This was the key. This was the threat that made Elena's actions understandable. She wasn't an activist, she was a terrified grandmother. "I said, stay quiet, because I thought he might be listening through the walls already. I was protecting Marco," Elena finished, the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I am so sorry, Mr. Calderon. I couldn't risk my little boy." Victor moved instantly, stepping off the stool and going to Elena. He gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "Elena, you saved my life. You don't have to apologize for protecting your family. You did the right thing." But even as he comforted her, even as he felt genuine respect for her desperate courage, a tiny, cold knot of suspicion remained. Her story about the threat to Marco was utterly convincing. It provided the perfect motivation for her silence and her warning. But it didn't explain the full picture. Victor realized, the threat to Marco was real. It was Alessandro's way of controlling her today. But Elena's actions, the intimate knowledge of the house, the sweeping of the service stairs, the anticipating of his return, suggested she was executing a plan that had been in place for weeks or months. She wasn't just reacting to a threat, she was finally activating a deep cover failsafe. "Thank you for your honesty, Elena," Victor said, his expression gentle but his eyes intensely watchful. "I will ensure your grandson and daughter are safe. That is my absolute promise. But we have to move now." "There is a vehicle waiting for you," Elena said instantly, regaining her composure and wiping her tears. Her return to professionalism was startlingly fast. "It's an old, unmarked service van. It's parked in the back corner of the grounds, near the greenhouse. Alessandro's men won't be looking for a maintenance van." "How do you know that?" Victor asked, his voice sharp. Elena didn't flinch this time. She looked at Eliza and a shared, knowing glance passed between them. It was a glance that said, "The husband needs to be kept in the dark about how competent we are." "Because Eliza prepared for this, Mr. Calderon," Elena stated calmly. "She had a contingency plan in place in case you ever needed to disappear quickly. She purchased the van weeks ago and parked it there, instructing me to keep it clean and fueled. It doesn't run through your regular accounts. It's paid for in cash." Victor looked at Eliza. His wife, whom he had always tried to protect by keeping her unaware of his dangers, had been silently preparing for his downfall. It was a terrifying yet deeply heartwarming revelation. "Well done, Eliza," Victor murmured, his pride outweighing his shock. "It's unlocked," Elena hurried on. "The keys are in the glove compartment. You must take the rear path, the one that leads through the old gardener's sheds. It bypasses the main gate cameras and the exit sensor." Victor nodded, absorbing the final crucial details. He was following his wife and his maid out of his own fortress. He knew Elena was holding back something, a connection to his past, a deeper reason for her fear that predated Marco's current danger. But that mystery, that small, essential lie, could wait. Right now, the truth was this. Elena had risked her family for his safety. He walked to the back door, opening it just a crack to peer out. "We're going now. Thank you, Elena. We will not forget this." Elena stood in the kitchen, her hands clasped tightly. "Go. And please be safe. You have more to fight for than you know." As Victor and Eliza slipped out into the cool evening air, leaving the silent, compromised house behind, Victor felt the weight of Elena's parting words. Her loyalty was true, her love for her grandson was real, but the whole story? Not yet. He knew that the core of her fear, the reason she had been preparing the house's weak spots for so long, had nothing to do with Marco's current threat, but something much older, much darker, and deeply tied to the history of the Calderone family. But for now, that deep well of protective love she showed for her grandchild, that was the light they needed to follow. They were alive, they were together, and they had hope. The cool, damp air of the early evening hit Victor and Eliza as they slipped out the back door, heading toward the rear perimeter of the massive estate. They moved quickly, their footsteps silent on the gravel path that wound through the perfectly pruned rose bushes and past the dark looming shape of the greenhouse. Victor kept his body angled toward the house, his eyes constantly searching the shadows, expecting any moment to hear a shout or the roar of a car engine. Eliza was right beside him, holding his arm tightly, not out of weakness but out of connection. She navigated the unfamiliar path with an uncanny certainty, following Elena's directions perfectly. "The van should be just past those hedges," Eliza murmured, her breath puffing in the crisp air. "It's dark gray. Looks like a repair van." They reached the end of the well-maintained lawn and found the vehicle Elena had described, a battered, nondescript utility van, the kind you would see parked outside a construction site in Manchester or repairing a phone line in upstate New York. It was anonymous, and right now anonymity was worth more than a fleet of luxury sedans. Victor quickly opened the passenger door for Eliza, ensuring she was inside before circling to the driver's side. He didn't waste time checking the engine or the oil. He trusted Elena's desperate preparations. He slid into the worn driver's seat, pulled the keys from the glove compartment and fired the ignition. The engine coughed once, then caught, settling into a rough, reassuring rumble. "Hold tight," he instructed, pulling the gear stick into reverse. He maneuvered the heavy van carefully down the narrow, overgrown service road that led away from the house, exactly as Elena had advised. This path, intended for the gardener's equipment, led directly to a secluded exit sensor that was known to be faulty. As they bumped along the uneven track, Victor's mind was still reeling from the events inside the house. Alessandro's return, the ceiling camera, Elena's controlled terror, and Eliza's secret preparations. But one piece of the puzzle, a name he hadn't heard in years, kept scratching at the edge of his thoughts, demanding attention. "Eliza," Victor began, his voice low over the sound of the engine. "When we were talking in the bedroom, what was that picture frame you were holding? Before I came in." Eliza hesitated. Victor glanced at her. Her face, pale in the dim light filtering from the dashboard, looked drawn, haunted. "It was a photograph," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "Of you, Alessandro and Luca. From when you were boys. You were all standing on the dock at the old villa in Italy." The name landed in the quiet cab of the van like a dropped piece of steel. Luca. Victor felt a familiar, sharp pang of cold dread twist in his chest, a feeling far worse than the threat of Alessandro. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Why are you looking at that photo now?" Victor asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Because the man who was talking to Elena, the man she described, the one watching Marco, he sounds like someone Alessandro hired," Eliza explained, her voice trembling slightly. "But he used a name. A code name maybe. He called himself the Architect." She turned to Victor, her eyes earnest and searching. "Victor, Elena told me that Alessandro had to have had help setting up the new cameras and running the wires. She said only someone who knew the old plans, someone who helped build the very first security system, could have found those exact spots." Victor drove in silence for a long moment, the van finally hitting the smooth asphalt of the secluded side street. They were officially off the estate grounds. He pulled over under the thick canopy of trees, killed the engine and turned to face his wife. "What are you saying, Eliza?" "I'm saying, what if Alessandro isn't doing this alone?" she whispered. "What if he has help from inside the family? Someone who knew the house better than anyone else. Someone who hated you both equally." The realization hit Victor with the force of a wrecking ball. The power surges, the dead zones, the systematic compromise of a decades-old system, it all pointed not to a hired thug, but to a master planner, someone who knew the historical vulnerabilities of the Calderone operation. And there was only one person with that level of intimate knowledge, that deep-seated resentment and the engineering skill to pull it off. Luca Calderone. Luca was the middle brother, the quiet one, the brilliant one who had been involved in the technical side of the family's business. Years ago, Luca had attempted a quiet coup, A bloodless takeover based on overwhelming information control. It had failed spectacularly. Victor had handled the cleanup personally. The official story, told only within the family's inner circle, was that Luca was gone. Erased, dead, buried under layers of secrecy and concrete far from home. Victor had ensured everyone believed it, especially Alessandro. The truth was Victor couldn't kill him. Not completely. Luca was family. Victor had given him an ultimatum. Disappear entirely, take a new name, and never show his face or communicate with the organization again, or face the end. Victor had done the unthinkable. He had offered his brother a mercy that his life and position should have forbidden. And he had lived with the guilt ever since. The guilt of letting Luca live, wondering if that mercy was a weakness that would one day ruin them all. "He's dead, Eliza," Victor said, his voice flat, but the tremor of certainty was absent. "He died in Europe years ago. That was settled." "Was it, Victor?" Eliza challenged softly, reaching out to touch his face. "Or did you just tell everyone he was dead? Did you let him go? Did you give him a new life?" Victor couldn't hold her gaze. He looked out the window at the dark woods. The shame of his unfinished blood, the one act of mercy that compromised his entire ruthless reputation, was now coming home to haunt him. "He was the architect of our father's security system," Victor confessed, his voice heavy. "He knew every wire, every blind spot, every protocol. If he is the architect, then this isn't just a takeover. It's a perfectly executed, personalized dismantling." Eliza didn't judge him. She simply moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then we have to assume he is alive, Victor. And we have to assume he's working with Alessandro. They are two different kinds of danger. One is brute force, the other is silent calculation." Victor felt the familiar weight of the world settle back onto his shoulders, but this time it felt different. He was no longer just the ruthless boss. He was the older brother who had failed to protect his family from itself. His reputation as a merciless leader was built on the very lie that was now unraveling. His fear wasn't for his power. It was for the chaos that Luca's survival would unleash, and the guilt that Victor himself was responsible for bringing the fight to his wife's door. "If Luca is alive," Victor said, his voice gaining a sudden, hard resolve, "then he has broken the oldest rule. He has come back to tear apart the family, and that is something I cannot forgive." He started the van again, pulling onto the main road and accelerating. He was leaving his old life behind, but he was carrying his true enemy, his own history, with him. As they drove, Eliza pointed to a small, brightly lit fast food place on the side of the road, the kind you'd see near any major highway in North America. "We need to look normal," she said. "We need coffee. We need to be seen. Let's act like we're just two people starting a long drive." Victor glanced at the familiar, comforting glow of the sign. Acting normal. That was the perfect cover. He pulled into the parking lot, the old service van looking completely unremarkable against the backdrop of late-night commuters and travelers. They were out of the fortress, and the simple act of ordering a coffee together felt like a lifeline. Victor knew that the path ahead was dark and dangerous, filled with the ghosts of his past. But sitting next to Eliza, feeling her unwavering support, gave him a strength no weapon could provide. His unfinished blood had returned, but he was not alone. The simple, real-world connection with his wife was the true sanctuary. He looked at her and his eyes softened. They were in this together, and with that understanding, hope was not lost. They had survived the first night and they would survive the next. Victor and Eliza were miles away from the estate now, tucked into a small, nondescript motel room off a major highway heading south toward the border. It wasn't the kind of place Victor Calderone ever stayed. The towels were thin and the window overlooked a buzzing street lamp, but it was safe. It was anonymous. Eliza was curled up on the edge of the bed, her face pale with exhaustion but her eyes alert. Victor, however, couldn't rest. He was sitting at the tiny desk, hunched over his travel bag. He pulled out an old, beat-up laptop. A simple machine that looked cheap but ran only the most secure, encrypted operating system. He needed to know the full depth of the betrayal. He connected to a hidden satellite-based network. This wasn't the Calderone main server. It was a ghost connection, known only to Victor and one trusted technician years ago. He was taking a massive risk, but he had to see the gate logs. "It's not enough that Alessandro is back," Victor muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "He's a brute. I can anticipate him. But those cameras in the ceiling, that was planning. That was Luca. And Luca would never risk stepping back onto my property without absolute certainty that he was allowed. Luca built the traps, Victor, Eliza said softly from the bed. But someone had to open the door for him. Someone still inside your organization. Victor found the remote logs for his main gate, the iron fortress that was supposed to keep everyone out. He scrolled back hour by hour, past the time he left on Monday morning. He found the entry log he was looking for. Monday, 11:47 a.m. Vehicle ID, white utility van, local services contractor. Time of entry, 11:47 a.m. Time of exit, 3:02 p.m. Gate protocol, bypass, maintenance override, authorized by V. Calderon. Victor froze, his hand hovering over the mouse pad. He stared at the screen, reading the entry line 3 times, his breath held tight in his chest. V. Calderon. The authorization was listed under his name. The maintenance protocol bypass code, the one that deactivated the alarm sensors and the guard checks, was his personal override, the highest level of security access. Victor had left the house at 8 a.m. that morning. He was on a plane to Chicago by 9:30 a.m. There was no way he could have authorized a 4-hour maintenance window for a contractor to do a bypass at 11:47 a.m. They didn't break in, Victor said, the realization hitting him with a sickening thud. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but laced with a cold fury. They were invited. They were signed in by me. Eliza quickly slid off the bed and came to stand behind him, looking over his shoulder at the harsh glow of the screen. That code, she said, her voice dropping. Only a handful of people knew that code, Victor. And you kept it locked down. Who else could have accessed your private terminal? Victor closed his eyes, leaning back in the chair. The betrayal he had expected to be at arm's length, an organization member bought off by Alessandro, was now confirmed to be right next to his heart. The people who had access to that level of forging power were his inner circle. Marcus, his chief legal counsel who handled all financial and property permissions. Franco, his oldest lieutenant who managed all physical security and access protocols. And Anna, his executive assistant who scheduled his life and had access to his biometric sign-ins. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a meticulously planned coup. Alessandro, the brute, needed Luca's brains. And Luca needed someone with the keys to Victor's kingdom, someone he trusted completely. It has to be Franco, Victor concluded, rubbing his temples hard. He manages the physical security. He would know the gate logs could be remotely modified. He knew the maintenance schedule. He knows that code by heart. Franco. A man Victor had risked his life for more times than he could count. A man whose children Victor had put through the best schools. The weight of that specific personal betrayal was heavier than any physical danger. Eliza put her hand on his arm, grounding him. Victor, look at the logistics. They let Luca in at 11:47 a.m. He spent 3 hours planting the new system, rerouting the power, disabling key lines. Then he left. Alessandro didn't walk in until yesterday evening, well after Luca was gone. They wanted the house secure, wired, and ready for Alessandro to make his grand, theatrical return. Victor nodded, his mind now clear, cutting through the emotional fog of betrayal. It means Franco is the current weak point. He's running the organization now, keeping it calm, waiting for Alessandro to solidify the physical control. He is the mole who has been feeding Luca the protocols and the finances to do the work over the last few weeks. He remembered the small, almost meaningless details Elena had been hinting at. The expensive parts, the unnecessary maintenance checks, the constant small changes to the security schedules. Those weren't just glitches. They were Franco's fingerprints. He had slowly been setting up the infrastructure of Victor's own ruin. This is bigger than just the house, Eliza, Victor said, looking at his wife, his eyes cold with strategic focus. If Franco controls the access, he controls the money and the information flow. We can't use any of our accounts. We can't call any of our people. Everyone is being monitored by him, thinking he is the loyal second in command. Eliza didn't panic. She squeezed his arm. Good. Then we fight without them. We are better off without the baggage. We have cash. We have the van. We have freedom, Victor. Victor felt a flash of deep respect and love for her clarity. She wasn't focused on the loss, she was focused on the opportunity. Franco knows everything about my current life, Victor said, thinking out loud. But he knows nothing about my old life. He doesn't know the places I went before I was the boss. He doesn't know the people I trust who are outside the organization's current reach. He closed the laptop, cutting the dangerous connection. The betrayal hurt, but it also simplified things. He was truly alone, and that meant he was free to operate without considering the rules of his own organization. "We changed the game," Victor declared, standing up and pulling his dark blazer back on. "Luca is the key to Alessandro's takeover. If we find Luca, we stop the brain. Franco is just the hand that opened the door." He looked at Eliza, a deep, confident resolve returning to his face. "Luca will have set up a new command center somewhere remote, somewhere he feels untouchable. But he is a creature of habit. He will use old family haunts. Places only a brother would know." The feeling of being chased, compromised, and betrayed was overwhelming, but Victor found a solid footing in Eliza's presence. They were two people against an empire, stripped of their power and wealth, relying only on instinct and memory. This was their new beginning. They weren't fighting to reclaim a throne. They were fighting for their survival and for a chance to build something real, without the poison of endless loyalty checks and hidden enemies. Victor looked at Eliza, and a genuine smile touched his lips. A smile of determination, not menace. "We are going to find my long-lost brother," he said. "And we are going to finish the blood business I should have finished years ago. But this time we do it together." He took her hand. They were starting over, using a rented room, a burner phone, and a battered utility van. But they had the simple, unwavering certainty of their mutual trust, and that was the strongest power they could possess. Hope wasn't in their wealth, but in their freedom to fight as themselves. They walked out of the motel room, ready to drive into the rising dawn. Victor and Eliza had been driving for hours, moving away from the crowded eastern highways and cutting toward the quieter, more isolated areas near the Canadian border. They needed a place to hide, somewhere Luca wouldn't think to look. Victor was driving toward an old hunting cabin, a forgotten piece of Calderon history that hadn't been on any official records for decades. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the misty rural landscape in a pale gold light, Victor found himself thinking less about Franco's betrayal and more about Elena. Her story about her grandson Marco was heartbreaking and compelling. It explained her fear. But the knowledge of the secret stairs, the perfect timing of his escape, that level of detail felt too professional for a terrified maid. He pulled the van into a deserted diner lot for a quick, essential stop. Eliza went inside to grab coffee and a map, leaving Victor alone in the vehicle, giving him a chance to work on the last piece of the puzzle. He pulled out the simple burner phone they were using and dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. A number connected to a discreet, private information broker he relied on for sensitive background checks. This broker, a sharp woman named Carmen who operated out of a small office in Miami, didn't work for the organization. She worked only for money and complete secrecy. The connection was established quickly. Victor spoke in a low, coded voice, not mentioning names or places. "I need information on a contact," Victor said. "The name is Elena Moretti. She is a woman in her late 40s. Lives outside Toronto. Look at her history for the last 20 years. I need to know every job, every address, every name change." The broker gave a low, knowing grunt on the other end. "That kind of deep dive is dangerous, V. What makes this woman so special?" "She knows things she shouldn't," Victor said simply. "And she saved my life. I need to know why." He gave the broker the details, ended the call quickly and went inside to meet Eliza. They sat in a back booth, sipping the strong, bitter coffee. Victor looked perfectly calm, a tired businessman on a long, early road trip. "You're thinking about Elena," Eliza stated, not as a question but as a fact. "I am," Victor admitted. "She's the anomaly. Too much knowledge, too much calm in the face of absolute terror. She knew too much about the house and about my private life." They talked quietly about their plan. Lay low, contact old, truly loyal friends outside of Franco's reach, and then move on Luca. But every strategy kept circling back to the question of Elena. Just as they finished their coffees, the burner phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was Carmen. The message was terse, professional, and chilling. Subject: Moretti. History complex. Look up, the listener. Specialist in organizational transition. Known alias E. Valens. Operated in Europe. Highly paid. Disappears completely after contract fulfillment. Active last 6 months. Payment link sent. Victor stared at the text. The listener. The name hit him like a physical blow. In his world, the listener wasn't a maid or a cleaner. The listener was a legendary, ghost-like figure. A highly specialized operative who infiltrated powerful organizations slated for takeover or destruction. The listener's job wasn't to kill or steal. It was to observe, learn every vulnerability, and then ensure the target was either transitioned smoothly to the new management or eliminated with surgical precision. And the name E. Valens was the true confirmation. Valens was rumored to be the greatest intelligence operative of her generation. A woman who had successfully collapsed 3 major rival families across Europe and North America simply by learning their deepest secrets and their internal feuds. Elena Moretti was not a frightened grandmother protecting her family. She was a professional who had been living inside Victor's house for perhaps months, observing the routines, learning the blind spots, and waiting for the right moment to execute her transition plan. She was paid to be there. And she was paid by someone who wanted Victor gone. Victor showed the text to Eliza. Eliza's eyes widened, a look of shocked comprehension flooding her face. She wasn't hiding us from Alessandro, Eliza whispered, grasping the true danger. She was hiding us from her clients. Victor nodded grimly. She was placed here by whoever hired Alessandro and Luca, or by someone who decided to double-cross them. Her real job was to know every inch of that house, to understand every weakness, and to ensure the Calderone organization transitioned according to her plan. The emotional twist landed, sharp and painful. Victor remembered all the small, casual moments. Elena serving him tea, commenting on his stress levels, even suggesting he should take that particular service road because it was less dusty. Every interaction, every moment of perceived loyalty, was a professional intelligence gathering point. He thought back to the hidden stairwell, the knowledge of the faulty alarm sensor, the perfect timing of his escape. She hadn't been reacting out of fear. She had been executing her exit strategy for her target, Victor himself. But then the biggest question slammed into his mind. Why did she save him? If Elena was the listener, a highly paid professional executing a contract to transition the Calderone family, she had had countless opportunities to kill him. She had prepared his breakfast every day for 3 years. She had cleaned his study where his private weapons were kept. She was in the perfect position to deliver a silent, untraceable end. When he had walked in and surprised her in the kitchen, her job was simple. Keep him there long enough for Alessandro to hear him or find him. Her contract was to facilitate the takeover. By warning him, by giving him the escape route, by hiding him from Alessandro, she was actively betraying the people who hired her. She chose not to kill me, Victor said, his voice husky with the enormity of the realization. She had the keys to the kingdom. She could have put a sedative in my evening brandy any night in the last 3 years. When I walked back into that house, she could have simply waited for Alessandro to find me, and her contract would have been fulfilled. Eliza reached across the table and held his hand, her own eyes filled with a mixture of terror and awe. She looked at Marco's picture, Victor. She told you about the threat to her grandson. That was her cover, Victor countered, shaking his head. It was a masterful performance to ensure I trusted her enough to follow her plan. But the real reason is something else. He realized that the listener, a woman famous for her detached professional coldness, had developed a conscience. Or maybe she had simply come to see Victor not as a target, but as a man under siege, and his enemies, Alessandro and Luca, were worse than her target. The deepest wound of the day was not Franco's betrayal or Luca's return. It was the crushing realization that he had been spared by the one person whose job it was to destroy him. His survival wasn't due to his own strength, but to a professional operative's moral choice. Victor felt a rush of profound, complicated emotion. He had always relied on fear and force. Elena had relied on observation and detachment. And in the end, her humanity, the simple, real human connection she must have felt over 3 years, had made her choose to save his life over her very profitable, very dangerous contract. She is not our enemy, Eliza, Victor whispered, his eyes blazing with a new focus. She is the single most valuable person in this whole fight. She knows who hired her, she knows the timeline, and she knows their end goal. They were no longer 2 people running. They were 2 people who had just been given a massive, lethal gift, the loyalty of their greatest potential enemy. Victor stood up, his posture straight and determined. The fear of betrayal was replaced by the fierce, unwavering hope of an unexpected alliance. They needed to find a way to contact Elena safely without alerting Franco or Luca. The game had changed. They weren't fighting an unknown threat. They were fighting a known organization, and they had a secret, powerful ally who had already proven her loyalty. "We find a way to talk to the listener," Victor concluded, his voice heavy with respect. "She saved my life and I am going to save her grandson. That is the debt and I always repay my debts." He looked at Eliza and a smile of fierce determination returned. They were alive, they were allied, and they were fighting a hidden war with a legendary operative on their side. That, he knew, was the true definition of winning. Victor and Eliza had ditched the utility van for a nondescript rental car, paid for with cash from Eliza's secret stash. They had spent the last hour driving into a major metropolitan center in upstate New York, far from Victor's usual Canadian territory. The city felt busy and distracting, a perfect place to disappear. They needed a safe space to gather information, and Victor knew exactly where to go. An old, converted warehouse office building owned by a man named Silas. Silas was a retired accountant who owed Victor a massive, life-altering favor from 30 years ago, a debt so deep it transcended any organizational loyalty. Victor parked the car in an underground garage and led Eliza up a dusty service stairwell to the 4th floor. Silas's small, plain office was empty, just as Victor had called ahead and requested. The moment they were inside, Victor went straight to the secure landline. He had to assume Franco and Luca were tracking his movements and communications, but this was a risk he had to take. He needed to find Luca's command center, and he needed more information on the listener's employers. As he was setting up a series of complex, untraceable calls to his old contacts, he felt Eliza's hand suddenly grip his arm, tight and urgent. "Victor. Listen," she whispered. He froze, his hand dropping from the phone. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the old refrigerator. But beneath that hum there was a faint, almost musical sound. A rhythmic, scratching noise coming from somewhere in the walls. Scratch. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. It was the same sound they had heard in the attic above their bedroom. The sound of a man moving through the hidden, forgotten infrastructure of a building. "We're not safe here," Victor hissed, pulling Eliza behind the heavy, locked steel door of Silas's file vault. He drew his weapon, his body instantly coiled and ready. "How?" Eliza breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How did they find us so fast?" "We didn't tell anyone." "Luca is tracking the money, Eliza," Victor said, his mind racing. "He knew Silas owed me. Luca predicted exactly where I would run for help outside the network. He's anticipating my history." The scratching stopped directly behind the steel vault door. Victor pressed himself against the cold metal, bracing for the breach. This time he was ready. But instead of the sound of a drill or an explosive, they heard a small, muffled thump, followed by a low voice muttering in frustration. Then a piece of the wall next to the vault, a removable panel disguised as a junction box, snapped open. A man tumbled out, landing awkwardly on the dusty concrete floor. He was young, maybe early 20s, dressed in dark, worn clothes and covered in a fine layer of white dust and insulation. He was thin, wired, and terrified. He was not a hardened assassin. He was a courier. He had a bulky, custom-made backpack strapped to his chest, and he was clutching a small leather-bound briefcase. He looked up, saw Victor pointing a gun directly at his face, and froze, his terror palpable. "Wait. Don't shoot. I'm just the delivery guy," the courier stammered, raising his hands immediately. "I'm not one of them. I just run the packages." Victor stayed calm, his aim steady. "Who is them? And what are you delivering?" The courier, clearly a non-combatant, started trembling violently. "The architect. He hired me. Said I get paid $5,000 to put this case in the 4th-floor vent shaft of this building. It was supposed to be picked up by someone else. I swear I don't know who you are." "You work for Luca," Victor pressed. "And you follow his delivery instructions. Why move the package through the walls?" "Because it's safe," the courier cried, his voice breaking. "Luca says the walls are the old infrastructure. No cameras, no internet. Just old wires and ductwork. He calls it the Black Channel. We move everything through it. Information cache, small gear." Victor lowered his gun slightly. This confirmed everything. Luca hadn't just compromised Victor's home. He had compromised the entire city's old infrastructure, using decades-old construction blueprints and ventilation plans as his private, untraceable communication network. This wasn't a home invasion. It was a citywide conspiracy operating right beneath the surface. "Give me the case," Victor commanded. The courier didn't hesitate. He nervously slid the small leather briefcase across the floor. Victor picked it up, noting its weight. He forced the lock open with a quick, practiced twist of his hand. Inside, it didn't hold money or weapons. It held paper. Hundreds of crisp, perfectly organized documents. The documents weren't just financial records. They were dossiers, detailed, confidential files on every single high-ranking member of the Calderon organization. He pulled out the top sheet. It was a file on Franco, the treacherous lieutenant. It wasn't just bank accounts and contact details. It was a devastating record of Franco's most vulnerable secrets. A second illegal family in Italy, a history of drug use, and a secret meeting Franco had held with a rival cartel 3 years ago. "What is this?" Eliza asked, peering over Victor's shoulder, her voice filled with horrified understanding. "This is Luca's bomb," Victor said, his eyes cold. "He wasn't trying to kill me with a bullet. He was trying to kill my organization with information. He knew that if I suddenly disappeared, Franco would try to take over. But if these files were delivered to the right people, to the board, to the elder council, to the rivals, Franco would be ruined. My empire would detonate from the inside, consuming itself in chaos." Luca's plan was brilliant and terrifying. By releasing these personalized, highly damaging files, he would pit every remaining loyalist against every opportunistic betrayer. The result would be total, self-inflicted destruction, allowing Alessandro to walk in and take the scattered pieces without a fight. And Luca, the architect, would watch the entire thing from his dark channel. Victor turned back to the courier. "Who was supposed to pick this up?" "I don't know. Just a name, the key. And he was supposed to take it to the financial district at noon today." "The financial district," Victor repeated. That was where the Calderon corporate headquarters were located. Luca was planning to drop the files right in the middle of his organization. Victor looked at the courier, a flash of unexpected mercy rising in him. This kid was just an unknowing pawn. "Get back in your hole," Victor ordered, pointing toward the open wall panel. "You never saw me. You never saw this briefcase. If you tell Luca anything, I will find you and I will end you. Now move." The courier scrambled back into the darkness of the wall, pulling the panel shut behind him. The faint scratching started again, fading away quickly. Victor and Eliza were alone again, standing in the middle of a city-wide battleground. The stakes were now terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just Victor's life. It was the lives of every family connected to his organization, all set to be destroyed by Luca's detonation package. Victor looked at the documents in his hands. He couldn't destroy them. Luca probably had duplicates ready to go. He couldn't keep them. They were too dangerous to carry. He had to use them. He realized his first move was to save his empire by showing them how close they were to destruction. But to do that, he had to be completely honest about his own knowledge. He looked at Eliza, his face a mask of grim determination. "We have to go to the financial district. I have to deliver this bomb myself before Luca's proxy, the key, does it. But I can't just drop the files. I have to use them to expose Luca and Franco, and to turn the entire organization on Alessandro." This confrontation was not going to be fought with guns but with truth. Victor felt a strange, thrilling sense of release. He was no longer running from his enemies. He was running toward them, armed with their own terrible secrets. They had been saved by Elena, betrayed by Franco, and hunted by Luca and Alessandro. But now, with the enemy's own weapon in his hand, Victor was ready to fight back. He smiled at Eliza, a smile full of dangerous hope. They were stepping into a much larger, darker game, and he was ready to play to win. Victor and Eliza were on the move again, heading straight for the gleaming skyscrapers of the city's financial district. The leather briefcase containing Luca's devastating dossiers sat between them on the console, a silent, ticking time bomb. The sheer scale of the conspiracy, a network operating beneath the streets, an organized betrayal by a brother Victor spared, and a ruthless lieutenant named Franco, demanded a complete overhaul of Victor's plan. But before Victor could face the organization, he had to settle the most complicated betrayal of all. Elena, the listener. He pulled the rental car into a secure, enclosed parking garage several blocks from the corporate headquarters. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet of the small space magnified the urgency between them. "Victor, we have to talk about Elena," Eliza said, her voice strained. She reached out and gently touched the briefcase. "If she is, the listener, a high-level corporate assassin, she knows who hired her. And she knows their ultimate goal for the organization. That is the only piece of information we don't have." Victor leaned back, staring out the windshield at the concrete wall. He knew the rules of his world. Duplicity is punishable by death, regardless of the outcome. Elena was a professional ghost, a spy placed inside his home. She had violated every tenet of trust. "The rules say I eliminate her," Victor said, his voice hard, reciting a painful code of conduct. "She was planted there to facilitate my demise. Even if she chose not to push the button, she's a loose thread and she knows too much." "But she chose not to push the button, Victor," Eliza countered, her voice rising with fierce conviction. "She had a contract to deliver you to Alessandro or to kill you herself. She had 3 years of chances. She risked her own life and Marco's to save you. Why? Because she saw something in you, Victor. She saw the man I see, not the monster the world fears." Victor closed his eyes, the weight of her words heavy on him. He had always been a man of predictable ruthlessness. That predictability was his strength and his weakness. If he killed Elena now, he would be safe, but he would lose the one person who could give him the full picture of the enemy's timeline and ultimate goals. "She is a professional, Eliza," Victor argued, opening his eyes. "Her choice to save me was a betrayal of her own clients. That means she is now in as much danger as we are. If Luca and Franco find out she is the listener, and that she helped me escape, they will move heaven and earth to silence her. Then we protect her," Eliza insisted, laying her hand over his. "We use her knowledge to find Luca, and we use her situation to find her employer. We can't rely on Franco's intelligence anymore. We need the deep professional truth. And she is the only person who has it." Victor looked at his wife, seeing the steel beneath her quiet exterior. She was challenging the foundation of his entire belief system, that fear and elimination were the only pathways to power. But she was right. If he wanted to survive the unconventional attack orchestrated by Luca, he couldn't use the old, conventional rules. The rules had to change. Victor made a decision. A decision that went against decades of brutal training, but felt absolutely right in the moment. "We need to contact her," Victor declared, pulling out the burner phone. "But we can't call her private number. Franco is listening to every line." He thought back to Elena's training. Operatives like the listener always had a fail-safe, a secondary non-digital channel for emergencies. Something simple, something that looked like part of her routine. "The laundry," Victor muttered, remembering the sheer volume of high-end dry cleaning and laundry the estate generated every week. She used a special laundry service downtown. She'd leave a tag with a small, coded message in the pocket of my coat every time she sent it out. He quickly pulled up an online map and located the high-end dry cleaner Elena used. He found the phone number. "I can't call them. They'll know my voice," Victor said. He looked at Eliza. "You will call. You will use a code word only Elena would recognize. If they answer with the counter code, you hang up. It means she's trapped. If they answer with silence, you give them a single instruction. You tell them to relay a message through a dead-drop location only she would use." Eliza nodded, her hand steady as she took the phone. The conversation was quick, tense, and professional. Eliza called the dry cleaner. "Hello, I'm calling about an order," Eliza said, her voice sounding smooth and practiced. "I believe there was a mistake with the starch on the last batch of shirts. The midnight blue was too stiff." The code word, midnight blue, referred to the color of Victor's most expensive custom-made shirts, and the severity of the starching was a secret known only to Elena and Victor. A nervous but familiar voice answered on the other end. "I apologize, madam. We have a countercode for that. Your current order will be ready on Thursday." Eliza immediately hung up, her face draining of color. "Thursday. That's the countercode. It means she's trapped. They're watching her, Victor. They know we might try to contact her." Victor felt a chill. The enemy was so far ahead of him. Luca and Franco had predicted his first move after escaping. They haven't killed her yet, Victor realized. That means they are using her as bait. They want her to think she is still safe to see if she leads them to me. Victor looked at the briefcase full of dossiers. He had to act. He had to deliver a message that not only exposed Franco and Luca, but also offered a lifeline to Elena. He quickly scribbled a note on a small piece of paper, using a cipher only 3 people in the world, Victor, Elena, and his late father, would understand. The message was simple but devastating. Marco is safe. The listener's contract is void. Luca's package is delivered by V. at noon. The message guaranteed 3 things. It told Elena that Victor knew her identity but was offering her protection for her grandson. It showed her that Victor had Luca's bomb. And it gave her a precise location and time to watch the fireworks. Noon at the Calderone headquarters. Victor then used the phone to call a distant retired associate, a man named Benny who ran a small legitimate courier service. "Benny, I need a drop," Victor said, cutting straight to business. "I need this note taped to the inside of the fuse box in the back alley of the dry cleaner in the next 30 minutes. Cash on arrival. Do not be seen." Within 5 minutes the deal was done. The message was on its way. Victor looked at the briefcase. It was time to choose. He could hide, try to eliminate Franco quietly and restore order. That was the old rule. Or he could trust a woman who tried to destroy him, expose his deepest shame, sparing Luca, and gamble his entire empire on a single public act of transparency. He looked at Eliza and a smile of fierce, reckless determination returned to his face. "We go public, Eliza. We don't hide the truth. We use Luca's bomb to expose the rot in the walls, and we prove to Elena that I'm worth saving." Victor stepped out of the car carrying the briefcase. He was going to walk into the financial heart of his empire, a place controlled by the man who hated him, Luca, and the man who betrayed him, Franco, and he was going to turn over the entire game board. He was choosing radical trust over ruthless elimination. He was choosing to protect a spy and her grandson over protecting his own reputation. This choice, fueled by the love and conviction of his wife, and the surprising loyalty of a professional ghost, permanently altered how power operated in his world. Victor Calderone was no longer the predictable, ruthless boss. He was a survivor, and he was about to prove that a man's word, and his mercy, was more powerful than any bullet or any forged document. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Victor was ready to fight for his life, his wife, and the unexpected alliance that had saved his soul. The massive, polished granite tower that served as the Calderone headquarters loomed over the financial district like a monument to cold, silent power. It was almost noon. The sidewalks were bustling with sharp-dressed city workers, all oblivious to the life-or-death drama unfolding within the walls. Victor and Eliza stood across the street watching the main entrance. Victor still carried the leather briefcase, its contents ready to ignite chaos. He was dressed simply, looking like a man who hadn't slept, not a powerful boss. Eliza stood close, her presence a silent, unwavering shield. "Franco will be in the penthouse," Victor confirmed, checking his watch. "He'll be trying to manage the panic I caused by disappearing. He'll be ready for Luca's courier, the key, to arrive with this briefcase." "We beat the key," Eliza said, her voice steady. "We walk in. We go straight to the executive floor. This has to happen in front of people, Victor. It has to be undeniable." Victor nodded. He knew the risk. Walking into that building was walking into a cage run by his betrayer. But it was the only way to save his organization from imploding and to send a clear message to Elena that he was fighting for her cause. They crossed the busy street and walked into the grand marble lobby. The uniformed security staff, all Franco's men, immediately stiffened at the sight of Victor. The surprise was total. Victor didn't stop. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked toward the elevators, every step radiating silent authority. "Penthouse," Victor ordered, his voice deep and calm, when a security guard dared to step in front of the elevator. The guard, terrified and caught between his duty to Franco and his fear of Victor, stammered and let him pass. In the elevator, Victor pressed the button for the top floor. The ride was agonizingly slow. "Remember," Victor murmured to Eliza. "Luca and Alessandro want me out. But Franco wants me dead. Watch the doors." When the elevator doors finally opened onto the penthouse floor, the scene was exactly what Victor expected. Franco, impeccably dressed but visibly sweating, was standing in the opulent foyer, surrounded by 3 of his trusted security men. Franco's face went from professional calm to utter, panicked fury in an instant. "Victor, what are you doing here?" Franco demanded, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice cracked. "You were supposed to be indisposed. We were handling things." "Indisposed," Victor repeated, stepping out of the elevator, holding the briefcase loosely by his side. "Funny word, Franco. Is that what you call treason?" Franco's security men immediately reached for their sidearms. Victor didn't flinch. "Stand down," Victor said, his voice quiet but carrying a force that pinned the men in place. He looked Franco directly in the eye. "If you move, Franco, your last thought will be about your second family in Genoa, who will be very disappointed to know where all their money came from." Franco went ghostly pale. The mention of Genoa, a secret not even Alessandro knew, was the proof. "Luca," Victor hissed, confirming the true power behind the betrayal. "Only Luca would have known that secret, Franco. You're working for him." Franco knew he was exposed. He made one final desperate move, lunging toward Victor. Victor didn't hesitate. He swung the briefcase, the heavy leather and steel corner connecting with a sickening thud to Franco's jaw. Franco collapsed instantly, unconscious on the polished floor. "Call for security," Victor told the frozen guards. "Arrest Franco. He is a traitor working with the opposition. And do it now before the real chaos begins." The guards, seeing Franco beaten and knowing the implications of the Genoa remark, moved instantly to secure their fallen leader. Victor was back in control. He walked over to the massive panoramic window overlooking the city, Eliza right beside him. He opened the briefcase and took out one of the thick dossiers, the one on Franco, and placed it prominently on the central executive table. Then Victor did the unexpected. He pulled out the burner phone and dialed a number he knew Luca would be monitoring. The phone rang just once before a familiar, cold voice answered. "Victor," the voice said. "It wasn't Alessandro. It was Luca. You beat the deadline. I didn't think you had the speed anymore." "I have your package, Luca," Victor said, ignoring the taunt. "The dossiers. Your little bomb to destroy the organization. I'm in the penthouse. Franco is unconscious. Alessandro is nowhere to be seen. It's just you and me now, brother." There was a heavy silence on the line. "You're not going to hand over the files, are you?" Luca's voice was low, filled with an unexpected sorrow. "You're going to destroy them and keep pretending the rot isn't there." "I'm not destroying them," Victor declared, looking down at the cityscape, at the thousands of lives that depended on the stability of his organization. "But I'm not releasing them either. Tell me the truth, Luca. Why are you doing this? You don't want the throne. You just spent 3 hours planting a camera above my wife's head. You were trying to destabilize, not conquer." The devastating revelation followed. Luca's voice cracked slightly, shedding the coldness of the architect. "I came back because you gave me a life, Victor. And that life, away from all of this, showed me what we really are. We are a poison. Every deal, every dollar, every life we touch, it ends in violence and grief. You let me live, and I used that life to watch you continue the cycle." Luca took a deep, shuddering breath. "I didn't come back to take the throne, Victor. I came back to make you dismantle it. I built the security system and I knew how to take it apart. I knew you couldn't do it yourself. My plan was to force you to expose the rot and step down, not for Alessandro, but for the good of every person beneath us." The conflict reframed instantly. This wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a family reckoning. Luca wasn't the enemy. He was a moral compass Victor had left for dead, returned to force an impossible choice. "Alessandro came back because he smelled the blood of chaos," Luca continued, his voice tight with regret. "He wanted to pick up the pieces I created. I'm sorry about him, Victor. I only ever wanted to stop the business, not start a war." Victor looked at Eliza, his heart heavy with the weight of Luca's words. Luca was right. His empire was poison. And his mercy, the one act that had been his greatest shame, had returned to demand that he finally become the man Eliza saw him as. "I need your help, Luca," Victor said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I am not dismantling it, but I am changing it. I need to know who hired the listener, and I need to find Alessandro before he hurts anyone else." "The listener's contract was a warning," Luca admitted. "Her clients wanted the Calderone family gone. But I can't talk here. If you want my help, you have to prove you've changed the rules forever." There's one last piece of information in that briefcase, Victor. The one thing that will shock the entire council. Victor looked at the remaining papers. He reached for a sealed envelope tucked beneath the dossiers. He tore it open. Inside was a single signed confession. I see it, Victor said, his voice firm. It's the proof of the tax evasion scheme, the one that ties every major family together, including our rivals. It's the nuclear option, Victor, Luca warned. Release that and the organization is permanently fractured. Can never be put back together again. You lose everything. Victor looked out at the city, then down at Eliza, who was watching him with steady eyes. He had a choice. He could use Franco's dossier to execute a clean takeover, or he could use Luca's confession to dismantle the empire forever. Victor looked at the gathered security men at the empty executive offices, and then he made his choice. He walked to the massive fax machine on the executive desk. He carefully fed the single signed tax evasion confession into the machine. He punched in the code for the main family council's confidential lines. At exactly noon, the confession was transmitted. Victor Calderone permanently fractured his own empire, choosing a future of instability and danger over the security of a poisoned throne. He ended the call with Luca. The line was dead. He looked at Eliza, a genuine, powerful peace settling over him. He had lost everything his old self valued, but he had gained a freedom he hadn't known existed. We did it, Eliza whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You chose the truth. Victor took her in his arms, holding her tightly. We have nothing now, Eliza. No money, no power, just a borrowed car and a few clothes. We have each other, she said, pulling back and smiling through her tears. And we have a friend, Elena, who is still out there waiting for the signal that her grandson is safe. We have everything we need, Victor. Victor smiled. He had dismantled his kingdom to save his soul. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. He had lost the crown, but he had gained back his humanity. Hope, justice, and the deep, unwavering love of his wife had won. Now the real work began, finding Luca, saving Marco, and building a new, honest life together. The world had just exploded. Victor and Eliza had escaped the chaos they unleashed in the Calderone Tower, slipping out a side exit as news of the tax evasion confession ripped through the financial district, causing a swift and total meltdown. They drove away from the city center, the silence in the rental car heavy with the weight of Victor's irreversible choice. He had given up his empire. Now their focus had narrowed entirely. They needed to find Elena and prove that his choice was real. They were driving toward a prearranged dead-drop location, a secluded park bench near a historic library that Victor knew was an old, secure rendezvous point from the family's early days. A location too obscure for Franco or Luca to track immediately. As they drove, Victor's phone buzzed. It wasn't the burner phone. It was a secure, encrypted line that only the listener would know how to contact. The screen showed a brief, coded text message. Marco is safe. I'm waiting. The library. I need to finish the job. Victor looked at Eliza. The relief that washed over her face was immediate and profound. She saw the message. Eliza breathed. She knows you kept your word. She knows Marco is safe, Victor corrected, his voice sober. And she knows I delivered Luca's package. But she also says she needs to finish the job, Eliza. That doesn't sound like a woman who is ready to retire. They arrived at the library, a massive, imposing stone building with ivy crawling up its walls. Victor parked the car down the street. It was late afternoon. The park was quiet, the light growing long and golden. Elena was sitting on the designated bench, exactly as expected. She was wearing a simple dark coat and she looked utterly composed, her usual fear gone, replaced by a quiet, professional watchfulness. Victor and Eliza walked toward her slowly. Hello, Elena, Victor said, stopping a few feet away. Elena looked up, her gaze steady, moving from Victor to Eliza and back. Hello, Mr. Calderone. Or should I say Victor? The job is over, Victor stated, choosing his words carefully. Franco is exposed. Luca's plan has imploded the organization. You're free. I upheld my end. Marco is safe. Marco is safe, Elena repeated, her voice flat. But the job isn't over. Not for me. Victor knew this was the moment to understand her true, deep motivation. The reason she became the listener and the reason she had stayed in his home for 3 years, knowing she could end him at any moment. Who hired you, Elena? Victor asked, his voice low and demanding. Was it a rival family? Was it the council trying to take me out? Tell me the rest of the truth. Elena looked away for a moment out at the quiet park. When she looked back, her expression was filled with an agonizing mix of sorrow and resentment. The maid's facade was entirely gone. She was now Eve Valens, the cold, brilliant operative. No rival family hired me, Victor, she said, her voice dropping. I hired myself. I was paid to observe the Calderon Empire, to find the weak spot, and to ensure its destruction when the time came. I was waiting for Luca to return, or for the opportunity to present itself. Victor frowned. Why? Why did you make it your life's work to destroy me? Elena took a deep breath and the story poured out of her, raw and painful. My name isn't Elena Moretti. It is Sofia Vanni. The name struck Victor. Sofia Vanni. He knew that name. It was the name of a talented, independent accountant who had worked for an emerging real estate developer in Montreal 10 years ago. A developer Victor had forcibly absorbed into his operation during his ruthless rise to power. Your company was trying to stay legitimate, Elena, Sofia continued, her eyes burning with unshed tears. My husband, Alessandro, he was the developer. He wanted nothing to do with your family's violence. He only wanted to build honest homes. Victor remembered the incident, the swift, brutal takeover he had orchestrated to eliminate competition. He had never met the man he destroyed. He had just given the orders. When you moved in, Victor, my husband refused to sell, Sofia explained. Your men came to his office. They didn't just take his business. They hurt him. They hurt him so badly that he was never right again. He became reckless. He took risks. He started drinking, running up debts. She stopped, the emotion too heavy. Eliza quietly moved and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. He died in a car crash 6 months later, Victor, Sofia whispered, the tears finally starting to fall. He had nothing left. Your takeover didn't just ruin his business. It ruined his mind, his soul, and it killed him. That chaos you create, that poison Luca spoke of, it took my husband. Sofia wiped the tears away fiercely, her voice hardening with resolve. I was left with nothing but my daughter and my grandson, Marco. And I swore that I would use my skills. My ability to observe, to listen, to be invisible, to take every single thing you loved from you. I went to the organization's rivals, I sold my services, and I used their money to get myself placed inside your home. I was going to wait for the moment of maximum damage. The emotional collision was immense. Victor realized that Elena was the moral center of the story. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a casualty of his own relentless ambition. Her motivation was pure, justified vengeance rooted in a tragedy he indirectly caused. Victor felt a wave of profound shame. His fear, his secrecy, his power, it had all been built on the lives of people like Sofia and her husband. I am sorry, Sofia, Victor said, the apology deep and genuine. It was the first time he had apologized for his actions in his entire adult life. I didn't know your husband's name. I didn't see the people I hurt. I only saw the transaction. You only saw the transaction, Sofia agreed, her voice bitter. And that is why the job is not finished. Victor looked at her, confused. What more do you want? I have destroyed my empire. I am ruined. What is the final job? Sofia stood up, her gaze steady, moving past Victor to look at Eliza. The final job was to make you understand the damage you caused and to make you clean up your own mess. Luca's bomb exposed the business. But Alessandro is still out there. And he is a monster you created, Victor. He will go after Marco to punish me for saving you. He will go after your remaining contacts. He will go after Eliza. She looked back at Victor, the intense professional fire returning to her eyes. My debt is paid not by your death, but by your complete transformation, Sofia stated. You need to stop running. You need to use the knowledge I gave you and the freedom you earned to find Alessandro. You need to eliminate the violence you created. That is the final job, Victor. And until that is done, I am not going anywhere. Victor realized he wasn't just safe. He had been given a purpose. Sofia wasn't his executioner. She was his conscience. She was neither hero nor villain, but the moral anchor forcing him to be a better man. What do you need? Victor asked, his voice low and firm. I need access to the old network, the one before Franco took over, Sofia replied instantly. I know the protocols Luca is using. I can help you track Alessandro's movements, but I need a command center and I need safety. Victor looked at Eliza, who gave him a small, determined nod. We have an old hunting cabin in the hills, Victor said. It's secure off the grid. No one knows about it. We can set up there. We work together. Sophia smiled faintly, a ghost of the woman she used to be. The listener accepts the terms. But my name is Sophia now. And I am working for justice, not vengeance. Victor extended his hand. Sophia took it. The handshake was firm, not of a boss and a maid, but of two equals entering a dangerous alliance. Victor had lost his kingdom, but he had gained an unexpected ally, a new purpose and a clear path toward redemption. He was stepping into the most dangerous fight of his life, but he was doing it with his wife and his conscience by his side. The audience, having traveled from cold fear to this profound emotional turning point, was left with the overwhelming sense that love, truth, and genuine repentance had won. The story of Victor Calderón was far from over. It was just beginning, anchored by the unexpected moral force of Sophia Vanni. The old Calderón hunting cabin was deep in the Quebec wilderness, a few hours north of the border. It was remote, rustic, and most importantly, completely off the grid. Inside, Victor, Eliza, and Sophia, the listener, had set up their command center. A small folding table covered in old maps, a secure satellite phone, and Sophia's specialized encrypted laptop. The atmosphere was electric, not with panic but with sharp, focused strategy. They were three people fighting an invisible war against an entire network. The tax evasion confession hit the council 2 hours ago, Victor said, pacing the small wooden floor. They're not just panicking, they're already moving against each other. Everyone is trying to prove they weren't involved and everyone is pointing fingers at Franco. Franco's arrest was the perfect first domino, Sophia noted, her eyes fixed on her screen. She looked completely different now. The subservient maid was gone. The sharp, analytical operative was fully present. He can't talk, but he can be blamed for everything. Luca planted those dossiers to create a power vacuum, Victor. We need to fill that vacuum with noise, the noise of collapse. Their plan was simple, brutal, and brilliant. Stage a fake internal collapse. They had to make the remaining organization believe that the entire Calderón family had been ruined, that the federal authorities were closing in, and that the only remaining way to save themselves was to turn on the leadership. This would achieve two goals. It would force Alessandro out of hiding to seize the remains, and it would expose the last, most dangerous betrayer who was still operating in the dark. Franco was the hand, Victor analyzed. Luca is the brain. But someone is the ears. Someone else is listening to the chaos, ready to report back to Luca or Alessandro. Victor realized that in an organization built on silence and information control, the final betrayer would be the person who suddenly became too helpful, too eager to manage the collapse. They needed a scapegoat for the chaos, someone who could take the visible blame for the organization's meltdown and create a single clear target for the enemy. That target had to be Sophia. I need you to become visible, Sophia, Victor said, turning to her. I need you to be blamed for the collapse. Sophia nodded instantly. I already have a protocol in place. When I was hired, I created digital breadcrumbs leading to a false identity. Valens, an independent consultant hired by Victor to clean up the books. We can leak a story that I panicked, grabbed vital financial data, and disappeared, thereby crippling the network. Eliza looked concerned. But if you take the blame, they will hunt you, Sophia. They'll assume you ran off with the emergency funds. That is exactly the point, Sophia countered, her expression grim. Luca will assume Victor is running. Alessandro will assume Victor is hiding. They will not suspect that Victor is coordinating with the woman they are hunting. We make the fire visible, but the burn is silent. Victor accessed an old, forgotten emergency contact list. A series of numbers for key independent money handlers across New York, London, and Toronto, men who handled the family's shadow assets. He started sending out carefully crafted, encrypted messages, designed to sound like a man panicking and covering his tracks. To London banker, code. Vulture, transfer all assets from account 734 to the holding shell now. Authority is gone. The listener is running with the data. Protect the funds. To New York lawyer, code. Ghost, the feds have the books. Luca is alive. The organization is a dead letter. Get out. Protect your family. Within an hour, the panic was manufactured. The organization's shadow finance world was freezing, accounts were moving wildly, and the senior partners, seeing the tax evasion confession and these emergency messages, believed the end had come. The Calderon house was burning without a single spark. Now they waited for the final betrayer to show their hand. The last betrayer is someone who has access to Victor's communications, but is currently outside of Franco's net, Sophia analyzed, watching the network traffic flare on her screen. Someone who is watching the panic and then running straight to Alessandro or Luca to gain favor. Suddenly, a massive unscheduled wire transfer of $10 million appeared on Sophia's screen, moving from a neutral offshore account directly into an account owned by Franco's cousin. The transfer was initiated by a senior operations manager in the Toronto office, a man named Marco Ricci, who Victor had always considered completely loyal. "There he is," Victor whispered, pointing at Ricci's name on the screen. "Marco Ricci. He's trying to scoop up a piece of the falling empire by paying off Franco's family. He is the last betrayer." Sophia checked the digital log of the transaction. "He used the emergency access code you gave him a year ago, Victor. He didn't ask for permission. He's assuming you're dead or incapacitated." "The house is burning and Ricci is grabbing the silverware," Victor said, his eyes cold. "But he made one massive mistake." The mind-bending twist followed as Victor and Sophia exchanged a glance of perfect, synchronized strategy. "Ricci knows that I would only send those panicked, coded messages to my emergency contacts if I was running for my life," Victor explained to Eliza. "But Ricci also saw the original gate logs from the house, the ones showing Luca entering under my authorization." Victor revealed the trap they had set days ago. When he was setting up the encrypted laptop in the cabin, he had intentionally left a single visible email on his own computer at the main house. A message that looked like a simple travel note, but contained a highly specific coded phrase. Sophia nodded, smiling faintly. "Ricci is the only one who saw that email after I left the house and before the confession came out. He's the only one who can connect the dots between Luca's fake maintenance visit and the current chaos." Victor took the secure satellite phone. "We need to send one final message that only Ricci will act on. And we need to use Sophia as the final trigger." Victor dictated a message to Sophia, who quickly composed an encrypted email and sent it to a dummy account that she knew Marco Ricci was monitoring. The message was from the listener, and was a detailed list of safe houses where Victor Calderon was heading, all leading directly into a major police sting operation Victor had set up years ago. "Ricci will see that the listener is leading Victor to a trap," Victor explained. "Ricci will grab the message, bypass his superiors and go straight to Alessandro, knowing that delivering Victor's head on a platter will make him the new second in command." Eliza looked at Sophia, admiration in her eyes. "So you didn't just save Victor. You became his weapon." "I became his bait," Sophia corrected, looking at Victor. "I am the visible scapegoat, the running thief and the final offering. My debt to my husband is paid by dismantling the chaos, not by causing more death." Victor looked at the screen, watching Ricci's activity suddenly spike, the ultimate confirmation that the trap was set. The house was burning, and the final betrayer was running toward the visible flames, completely unaware that the fire was a joint illusion orchestrated by the very man he sought to destroy. Victor felt a sense of immense clarity. His new power wasn't in his name or his money. It was in the trust he had built with these two women. He had chosen transparency and honesty over violence and secrecy. The house had burned, but the foundation, the trust between them, was stronger than ever. "Ricci will lead us to Alessandro," Victor concluded, placing his hand over Sophia's and Eliza's. "Now we move." The chaos was contained, the betrayer exposed, and the moral center of the story, Sophia, was poised to deliver the final piece of intelligence they needed. Victor, once the king, was now the operative, ready to hunt the last remaining ghost of his old life. The hunting cabin had become a cage for the betrayer, Marco Ricci. Victor and Sophia had moved quickly, using Ricci's intercepted communications to track him to a remote lakeside cottage where he was waiting to meet Alessandro. Victor, Eliza and Sophia had captured him without firing a shot, proving that intellect and planning were now far more effective than brute force. Ricci was bound to a sturdy wooden chair in the center of the cabin, defeated, his face a mix of terror and disbelief. Victor stood over him, holding Luca's briefcase. You tried to sell your boss to my brother for a better job title, Richie, Victor said, his voice quiet, carrying the weight of final judgment. And you used the chaos I created to steal $10 million. Your loyalty was a lie from day one. Richie, realizing the game was over, finally broke. It wasn't loyalty, Victor. It was survival. Luca showed us the numbers. The organization was dying. He said Alessandro was the only future. I just wanted a seat at the new table. Victor didn't need any more from Richie. He had exposed the final piece of the organizational rot. But there was one last critical piece of information that only Richie could confirm: the full, devastating meaning of Sophia's first warning. Victor turned to Sophia, who was standing by the secure laptop, calm and professional. Sophia, Victor said, his voice firm. Tell him the first rule of your contract. Sophia looked at Richie, her gaze cold and level. My client, the group who wanted Victor's empire gone, had one initial command. They wanted Victor to be fully aware that he was being targeted before he was eliminated. It was a condition of my hiring. They wanted to see the look on his face when his world collapsed. Victor turned back to Richie. When I walked into the house, Richie, you told Alessandro I was back. What did Alessandro tell you to do? Richie swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between Victor and the silent, imposing figure of Sophia. He had me monitor the comms just in case you called out. He said he had an insurance policy in place. He said if you made one phone call, one attempt to reach your security or your lawyer, it was over. The kill order, Victor realized, the words tasting like ash. If I made a call, Alessandro wouldn't come for me. He'd hit the insurance policy. Victor walked over to Sophia. What was the insurance policy, Sophia? The one Alessandro would trigger if I spoke. Sophia looked at Victor, her expression softening slightly, a look of immense, weary relief washing over her face. When Alessandro walked in, he disabled your dining room feed and set up a temporary, untraceable frequency on your main house phone line, Sophia explained. I discovered it immediately. It was a digital deadman's switch. If that line was used, it would simultaneously detonate a small, shaped charge he had placed under the engine block of your wife's car, and release a video package to the entire organization. The video would have shown Franco confessing to everything, including stealing the emergency fund, thereby ensuring Franco's family was killed by my clients for the theft. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She remembered her car parked innocently in the garage. The first sound of your voice on that line, Victor, would have triggered the whole thing, Sophia said, looking at him with immense gravity. It wasn't a kill order on you. It was a kill order on Eliza and a kill order on Franco's family, to ensure maximum chaos and blame. Victor reeled. He remembered walking into the kitchen, adrenaline pumping, ready to shout into the phone, ready to call his guards, ready to do the one thing his old life trained him to do. He remembered seeing Sophia, terrified, her lips barely moving, mouthing the two words that had saved his wife's life and his own soul: stay quiet. The meaning of that first simple warning was fully recontextualized, delivering the ultimate emotional weight. Sophia wasn't hiding from an intruder. She was using the only language she had left, the silence of fear, to save the person Victor loved most, and to prevent an unnecessary massacre. The silence meant to save him, Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. You saved me, Sophia. You saved all of us. Victor felt a profound seismic shift in his understanding of loyalty. For years he had been surrounded by men like Franco and Ricci, men who offered loyalty for money and fear. The first true selfless act of loyalty he had received in years came not from a lieutenant, a brother, or a guard, but from a woman he had hired to clean his floors, a woman who had every right to hate him and allow his destruction. He looked at Sophia, her professional resolve softened by the undeniable truth of her compassion. She had been his enemy, his conscience, and his savior. You had every reason to let me make that call, Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. You had your vengeance. You would have been safe. Why? Sophia met his eyes, the final moral statement of the story delivered with quiet power. Because the chaos you created took my husband, Victor. And I realized that if I let you destroy Eliza and Franco's innocent family, I would become the chaos. My vengeance would have corrupted my soul. I came to dismantle the poison, not to spread it. She looked down at Ricci, a look of finality in her eyes. I realized that the poison isn't the organization, Victor. The poison is the absolute lack of mercy, the belief that others are just transactions. You showed me mercy years ago by letting Luca live. I showed you mercy to keep your wife alive. Now we fight for justice, not for a throne. Victor nodded, understanding the full circle of his life. His one act of compassion, the one flaw in his ruthless armor, had saved him years later. He turned to Ricci, his choice clear. You will go to the authorities, Ricci. You will tell them everything you know about Alessandro and Luca's movements. You will confess to your theft and your betrayal. You will face the law. That is the new rule. No more shadows. Victor looked at Eliza, and a smile of genuine, boundless relief spread across his face. He had lost his power, but he had found his truth. The emotional weight of Sophia's sacrifice, the simple, heroic act of keeping silent, was a lesson he would carry forever. He was no longer the Mafia boss. He was a man rebuilt by love and unexpected loyalty. They still had Alessandro to find, but now they had purpose. Victor, Eliza, and Sophia stood together, ready to face the world not with fear, but with the quiet, formidable strength of people who had chosen compassion over vengeance. The journey from crying to smiling was complete, anchored by the unexpected moral force of the listener. Hope, justice, and love had won, anchored by the profound silence that saved him. The cold, unforgiving mountains of the borderlands finally yielded the last ghost of Victor's old life. Alessandro was found 2 days after Marco Ricci was arrested, cornered in a desolate, abandoned warehouse where he had planned to wait out the chaos and reclaim the remnants of the Calderone Empire. Victor, Eliza, and Sophia didn't use any of their remaining contacts. They used only the pattern recognition skills of the listener, combined with Victor's intimate knowledge of Alessandro's paranoia. Sophia had tracked Alessandro's movements through his obsession with specific, untraceable European assets, leading them straight to his hiding spot. The confrontation was swift. Alessandro, furious and cornered, was subdued by Victor, who relied on speed and surprise rather than a drawn-out battle. No blood was spilled. Alessandro, like Franco and Ricci, was handed over to the authorities, along with irrefutable evidence of his plotting. Justice, cold and inescapable, was served by the very system Victor had once sought to avoid. With Alessandro incarcerated, the final piece of the poisonous puzzle was removed. Victor had not reclaimed his throne. He had dismantled the violence his throne represented. A week later, Victor and Eliza stood in the dusty, quiet living room of the remote hunting cabin. The only sign of their intense, desperate work were the empty coffee cups and the clean, bare table where Sophia had set up her sophisticated equipment. Victor was dressed in worn jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that fit his new reality better than any tailored suit. He looked at ease, his shoulders less tense than they had been in a decade. The authorities estimate the organization will dissolve entirely within 6 months, Victor said, his voice calm, reciting the facts like a final corporate report. Luca's documents, combined with Alessandro's and Franco's confessions, have guaranteed no one can put the pieces back together. The empire is gone, Eliza. Eliza walked over to him, lacing her fingers through his. And you, Victor Calderone, are a man who is officially retired. No one is looking for you. The world thinks you slipped away with a shell company and a pile of cash, running from the mess. The exit that was never planned, Victor mused, looking around the small, honest cabin. He defined himself by his empire for so long, and now he had nothing but his wife, his freedom, and a new, clean slate. The loss was real, but the relief was immense. A gentle knock sounded on the cabin door. Victor opened it. Standing there was Sophia, dressed in a thick, practical coat, her small duffel bag resting at her feet. She looked healthier, lighter. I came to say goodbye, Sophia said, her voice soft. You're leaving, Eliza stated, knowing it wasn't a question. My mission is complete, Sophia confirmed, offering a small, genuine smile. Marco is safe. He's back with his mother. I've set them up in a quiet town in Europe, using funds I secured before this all began. I will never operate again. The listener is retired. Victor nodded, understanding the gravity of her choice. She had completed her job, not the one she was paid for, but the one she chose for herself. Ensuring justice for her husband by forcing Victor to become the man who would stop the violence forever. The debt is repaid, Sophia, Victor said, extending his hand. You saved our lives. If you ever need anything at all, you know how to find me. Sophia took his hand, her grip firm and brief. I know, Victor. But my life is silence now. And yours should be too. She gave them both a final, knowing look, one that acknowledged the entire impossible journey they had shared, from the terrifying moment in the kitchen to this quiet farewell. She turned, walked down the snowy path and disappeared into the trees without looking back. Victor watched until she was completely gone. He hadn't just lost his empire. He had lost the maid, the spy, the conscience that anchored him. He closed the door, returning to the profound silence of the cabin. She's free, Eliza said, resting her head on his shoulder. We're free. Victor looked around the small room at the bare wood and the simple, honest furniture. He had everything he needed, but his mind flashed back one last time to the moment in the kitchen. He remembered Sophia's eyes, wide, terrified but resolute. He remembered the desperate, soft plea that had saved Eliza and changed his destiny. Stay quiet. The word silence, which had once meant fear, now meant sanctuary. It was the sound of a life stripped bare of its poison, a life free from the constant noise of paranoia and betrayal. The silence was the end of the fight and the beginning of their peace. Victor took Eliza's hand, leading her toward the small, clean kitchen. They had a long drive ahead of them, a journey toward a new life with new names and new simple goals. They had survived not by triumphing over their enemies, but by choosing to dismantle the war within themselves. The story didn't end with a bang, but with a quiet, powerful resolution. They were alive, they were together, and they had chosen love and honesty over power. The silence of the cabin promised a future where they could finally be just Victor and Eliza, a peaceful continuation that honored the warning that started it all. The door was closed and the new life had begun. We have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. Share your opinion about this story in the comments below. I like getting feedback from my audience. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories.